Easy Explain Cartesianism Discourse on the Method, Part 4. So moving into Part 4 of Descartes' Discourse here, we're really going to start to get into his metaphysics. He's already laid the groundwork throughout Parts 1, 2, and 3 about the rules to follow for his method and the moral maxims to sprinkle on top of those rules. So here when we start to look at the metaphysics, we really mean the very essence or nature of things. And Descartes takes a particularly close look at three concepts that are of huge interest to him, and they are the mind, the body, and God. So my approach through here, the fourth part of the discourse, this is a larger part, so I'm just going to focus on 5 quotes that I think are really meaningful, really significant, and then we're going to try to build out the argument that he has throughout this part in a kind of a summary format. So here's the first of 5 big quotes. Observing that this truth, I am thinking, therefore I exist, was so firm and sure that all the most extravagant suppositions of the skeptics were incapable of shaking it. I decided that I could accept it without scruple as the first principle of the philosophy I was seeking. So here we go. The first one, the big famous statement of I think, therefore I am, right? Or I am thinking, therefore I exist. Cogito ergo sum. And let's see how he builds from there. Moving on to the second big quote here. For this I knew I was a substance whose whole essence or nature is simply to think, and which does not require any place or depend on any material thing in order to exist. Accordingly, this I, that is the soul by which I am what I am, is entirely distinct from the body, and indeed is easier to know than the body, and would not fail to be whatever it is, even if the body did not exist. So this next step that Descartes takes is that the thinking thing, the mind, the thing that he's calling I, is a distinct thing from the body. He's setting up this argument that the mind is a distinct thing from the body. They are separate, although together, right? We're going to look at some kind of union here between the two, but he is setting up that they are two different things. Moving on to the third big quote here. So I decided that I could take it as a general rule that the things we can see very clearly and very distinctly are all true. Only there is some difficulty in recognizing which are the things that we distinctly conceive. So here we start to see this big rule for Descartes that clear and distinct things are true. He is acknowledging there's some trouble in determining what is clear and what is distinct, and he's about to resolve that next. But it goes back to the first 2 points that he is clearly and distinctly conceiving that his mind is separate from his body. So let's see how he resolves the issue he just introduced here, though, in the fourth quote. But many are convinced that there is some difficulty in knowing God, and even in knowing what their soul is. The reason for this is that they never raise their minds above things which can be perceived by the senses. And they are so used to thinking of things which only be imagining them, a way of thinking specially suited to material things, that whatever is unimaginable seems to be unintelligible. So here Descartes is saying that we need to get a little abstract. We need to think beyond the means of just our bodies. Essentially he's saying have this idea of the mind as something from separate and immaterial from the body. It's one way he's trying to get around it. And next we're going to start to look at an argument he has for God coming in here and how we can use God, or at least Descartes' definition of God, to sort through those clear and distinct ideas and understand that the mind and body are distinct here. So the fifth quote, for in the first place, what I took just now as a rule, namely that everything we conceive very clearly and very distinctly is true, is assured only for the reasons that God is or exists, that he is a perfect being, and that everything in us comes from him. It follows that our ideas or notions, being real things and coming from God, cannot be anything but true, in every respect in which they are clear and distinct. So Descartes saying that if things are clear and distinct, then they are coming from God, God as the perfect being. God would not give us reason that is false. So if you can clearly and distinctly perceive a mind being separate from the body, then it must be true. It'd be like saying that God can't be true, right? If you were to kind of deny that. So he kind of gets us there based on his definition of God. So if you take these 5 big quotes and sum them up in his main argument here, I tried to put the main argument here in part 4 together, premise by premise, following logically. So the first premise, I can doubt the existence of everything except the fact that I am doubting. From that follows, if I'm doubting, then I must be thinking. Then if I am thinking, then I must exist as a thinking thing. And Descartes is going to call this thinking thing the mind. Following from that, the next premise, the mind cannot be doubted, but the body can be doubted. I can doubt my mind, as my senses can be deceiving and imperfect. We know this. Despite imperfection, I can have the idea of a perfect being. We're going to call that perfect being God. So I know I am imperfect, but I have this idea of something that is perfect. So the idea of this perfection, the idea of this perfect thing we're going to call God, can't originate from an imperfect being. And a perfect effect cannot come from an imperfect cause. So me, as a mind-body duality, an imperfect thing, cannot give rise to the idea of a perfect thing. So now we must say that God exists, as it must be the source from which this idea of perfection originates. God, as a perfect being, would not engage in deception. So ensured by the perfection of God, the clear and distinct ideas that I have are reliable and trustworthy. They must be. So therefore, the mind and the body must be distinct entities. So feel free to go back and pause, look at these. I hope this helps.